In the last hour, you've been watching the ceremony which sees the Electoral Commission handing over the names of people who will go to Parliament, people who need to be sworn in. They're sworn in by the Chief Justice or by someone designated, a judge designated by the person in that position. Watching that process watching that ceremony along with you is the Professor of Political Science at the University of South Africa, Professor Dirk Kotze. Professor Kotze, good afternoon to you. Interesting comments by the Chief Justice. Seemed he used the opportunity maybe to make several points.
Yes, indeed so. And I think much more than what previous Chief Justices have done that, or even himself. I think what his point of departure was that the judiciary is criticized quite often nowadays. I think immediately about the MK party that of which the courts were really one of its main targets. And a lot of the issues were actually decided about the party through the courts. And then also the second point that he discussed about the separation of powers, which is very important. It's not only applicable to this point now of the beginning of a new administration and a new parliamentary term, but it is often involved in many other issues right through the period. So I think what he tried to do, and we can't forget he was the chairperson of the Zondo Commission. That created in itself a lot of questions about his role as at that stage the Deputy Chief Justice and at the same time the chairperson of that Judicial Commission of Inquiry. That led to, it especially affect President Zuma very directly, and that spilled over into this year's election about President Zuma's participation and qualification as candidate for Parliament. So there's certainly many issues. One can even add to that the fact that there were around about 17 court cases in the Electoral Court that affected the IEC, that were brought there by the MK party, but also by especially smaller parties, to clarify the interpretation of the Constitution and the Electoral Act and other legislation. So the judiciary in this election actually played quite a prominent role.
And I suppose the question is, did they overreach? But all they did was resolve disputes they were asked to resolve. People went to court. The courts didn't go to the people, if you see what I mean.
Yes, that is indeed so. And I think despite the criticism, that the courts have remained to a large extent neutral and independent, and played its constitutional role. I think the South African court, especially the Constitutional Court, becomes often very much or very close to political matters. But that's the very nature of constitutional courts, or in other countries, their Supreme Courts. Just think about the American Supreme Court, how political that has become. And the question is that they must really resolve the final questions of a constitutional nature, especially, or where the Constitution is relevant in that situation. So I would say our Constitutional Court, especially, to some extent the Supreme Court of Appeal also, have played that role. And the credibility in general, I would say, in South Africa of these courts are quite high.
What also I think we must prepare the ground for is that there are likely to be more political disputes that involve the courts in the next couple of years. We've seen, I mean, going all the way back to Nkandla, even before then, such a whole spate of them. And, I mean, the judges themselves have said in various speeches, and several former judges have said that, we don't like to be dragged into politics, but it seems inevitable if you just look at the nature of our politics at the moment. The politicians create situations in which the judges are called on to intervene.
Yes, that's very much the case. And think back, for example, the time of all these motions of no confidence that were tabled against President Zuma, and when they had to resolve matters about, for example, the powers of the Speaker, whether it should be, for example, a secret vote or a public vote, or several other aspects. Now it was very much about who qualifies as the participants in the election. And I think especially the case of President Zuma, on the one hand was very much about him, but it actually provided for the IEC and for us as the public a very good understanding of who qualifies and who is disqualified, for example, as a candidate in the National Assembly. So though it is about issues pertaining to particular cases, this the judicial interpretation ultimately and the precedents that it creates ultimately give us a better understanding of our own constitution also. And in this case, specifically how it relates to elections. So I think this is a teaching and a learning process for all of us.
This is also about the role of the judiciary during this time. So, I mean, we've become so used to it, all the way back to the swearing in of Nelson Mandela, you know, as president. It's always been the Chief Justice or a judge when it comes to premiers and other people. And in fact, it's the same in many other countries. You mentioned the United States. Their Chief Justice also, their chair of the judge of the Supreme Court also actually swears in the president there. I mean, it's quite common.
Yes, that is indeed so. And I think what it says is that after an election, there's actually no one who is an incumbent. The only incumbent of the three components of the state is the judiciary and the Chief Justice. So that for that particular moment is actually the person who personifies the state, whether it's the South African state or other state. So that is then the highest authority that exists at that moment in order to preside over such a process.
If we were to see the judiciary delegitimized, what impact would that have? And I mean, there are obviously some politicians who consistently and regularly attack the judiciary. But if we had a situation where the judiciary's decisions were not respected, not accepted, what would happen?
Well, I think first of all, it will mean that the basis, the foundation of the Constitution will be very, very brittle. It will be very uncertain. So the whole plan of the state, the foundation of the state of South Africa will be uncertain. The functioning of institutions, whether they are parliament or the executive or the judiciary itself, or whether it will be procedures about how, for example, to pass laws, how to pass the budget, how to change the constitution, amendments to the constitution, all will become negotiable, or it will become depend on who's the strongest political power at that point. So there's no neutral foundation which regulates and provides the procedures and clarity about how the state is supposed to function, the procedures, the decision-making process, how changes must be implemented. And it becomes only a way of who is the strongest, who has the most influence, who can determine this mainly through power politics.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Dirk Kotze. Really do appreciate the time. Professor of Political Science at the University of South Africa. Well, that ceremony has been underway involving the Chief Justice.